Good evening and welcome to the virtual information session for the proposed addition to Chapter 612 of Loudoun County's Ordinances. My name is Nina Stively and I'm the Director at Loudoun County Animal Services. Tonight I am joined by Chris Brosan, Chief of Humane Law Enforcement. Comments regarding this proposed addition will be accepted. Members of the public may provide comments through the comment form on our website, and that website will be provided at the end of this presentation and also in the chat box. This input will then be provided to the Board of Supervisors. First, I'd like to review a few housekeeping items. This meeting is being recorded, and technology permitting, the recording will be posted on the webpage following the event. Meeting attendees will remain muted and without video display throughout the event. If you're having technical difficulties hearing audio, you may try the phone line instead of using computer audio. To notify us of any issues with audio, you can also chat to staff using the Q&A tool within WebEx. If you are using the phone line, please submit your questions through the comment form and they will be answered at a later date. We are now going to start a brief presentation and then we will have opportunity for questions. So tonight, as everyone knows, we are here to discuss the proposed amendment to the Codified Ordinances of Loudoun County, Chapter 612, known as Dogs and Other Animals. The proposed amendment is regarding the prohibition of private ownership of exotic and venomous animals. Next slide. So just to go over what this proposal would look like, we are considering the prohibition of private ownership of certain exotic and venomous species of animals. Some examples of these animals would be venomous snakes, hybrid canines, non-native species such as koalas or kangaroos, primates such as baboons and marmosets, and other wild and or venomous animals such as scorpions and armadillos. Next slide. The reason we are looking at this proposal is that exotic and venomous animals held in residential settings are quite different from those in professional settings and present somewhat of a public safety risk to those around them. Some of those risks may include the risk of escape and inflicting harm on community members, the risk of certain zoonotic diseases. The diseases that wild and exotic animals carry are quite different from those in domestic animals and livestock. We have the risk to first responders entering premises, and then the risk to local ecosystems and wildlife, also as a consideration. Next slide. We do have some proposed exemptions, and this is a really important part for everyone to understand, is that this is not a blanket exclusion of all sorts of common pets. So oftentimes you'll hear people refer to common pets like ferrets or guinea pigs as exotic animals. Those animals are not included in this in any way, shape, or form. So any of your common pets, the types of pets you would typically acquire, like a Petco or a PetSmart, guinea pigs, rabbits, hedgehogs, those are not part of this ordinance at all. So there would be no impact to any ownership of those types of pets. Other exemptions would be licensed exhibitors. So this would be what you typically think of as a zoo, a petting zoo, any sort of exhibitor who is licensed by the state or federal government to be exhibiting these animals. You would also have exclusions for rehabilitators. So those are people who have gone through specialized training and are registered with the state to make sure that they are permitted to rehabilitate certain animals. And really any others who have state or federal permits would all be excluded from what we are talking about tonight. Other animals that would be not impacted by this legislation would be lawfully obtained non-venomous reptiles and amphibians. So if you have, say, an iguana, a ball python, any of your constrictors, newts, toads, those are not included in this ordinance proposal. And then other exemptions would be your lawfully obtained exotic birds and ratites. So birds, you think of any of your common pet birds, so cockatiels, parrots, parakeets, and then ostriches and emu have an agricultural purpose, and those would all be excluded as well. Ostriches and emu are called ratites, so if you see that elsewhere, that is what we are referring to. Next slide. For those who already have these pets, we recognize that there is an element of the human-animal bond that we want to preserve. We are not looking at separating pets from their people. So we were proposing that there is a grandfather clause established, and this would allow any residents who currently possess any of the species that would be prohibited under this ordinance, as long as you are currently possessing and caring for them lawfully, that you can continue to retain ownership for the life of that animal, as long as it is registered with Loudoun County Animal Services and the housing would be inspected. So following this process, we do a few more steps. Nothing is set in stone. Previously, we've gone to the Finance Committee, the Finance, Government Operations, and Economic Development Committee, where it was advanced to the next Board of Supervisors business meeting. So tonight we are collecting input from the community and fielding any questions to try and understand what concerns for our constituents might be and make sure that all your questions are answered. And then we'll be going on to the Board of Supervisors business meeting on January 17th. That will be at 4 o'clock at 1 Harrison in Leesburg. And then we've got the Board of Supervisors public hearing. This date is tentative because it will depend whether or not they advance this topic to that meeting. As long as things go according to the projected schedule, that would be held on February 15th, also at 1 Harrison Street in Leesburg. But that date will be confirmed once we go to the meeting on January 17th. So for any additional information, we do have a specialized website posted here. We are going to have this posted in the chat so you can click it and save it or copy and paste it for future use. But that'll be right at loudoun.gov/chapter 612 edition. You'll be able to see any updates and where we are in the progress. You'll also be able to access recordings and the full answer to any questions. Tonight, we are going to be accepting questions right up until 7 o'clock. If we do receive more questions and we run out of time, those questions will still be answered, but they'll be answered in the written form and posted to the website. So you have access to all of that. If you have additional questions that you choose not to share here, you are welcome to send those to us at animals@loudoun.gov. And there's also a public comment form, which will also be linked in the chat. So you have access to that. And anything provided in the public comment form will be sent directly to the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors. So our team is here. I am here with Chief Brosan. We are on the line and ready to answer any questions that you may have. So in order to type a question, I'm just going to go right over on to the right side of your screen. At the very bottom right, you'll see a little button that says QA. You'll click on that. You'll type your question in the box to ask a written question. And then you'll select all panelists to make sure we can see your question and then click send. You are muted throughout this process, so there will not be an opportunity to speak, but you can still post any of your questions or feedback right in that chat. And if you do get disconnected, please just attempt to rejoin the meeting and we'll do our best to get to your questions still. And I will have Talia be reading any questions that do come through. If there's any just general feedback, such as comments or statements, those will not be read at this time. They will be saved and collected, provided to the Board of Supervisors and to our staff, and still saved as part of the record for this meeting, but we will only be reading questions aloud at this time.
We have our first question from Amy Rodriguez. The question is, who sponsored, wrote / sponsored this proposal?
So with regards to local government, it has a little bit of a different process. So this proposal was drafted by staff at Department of Animal Services for Loudoun County and presented to the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors, with the first step being at the Finance Committee. Feedback was provided from that committee and integrated into the current draft.
Our next question from Lori Wynn, asking if instead of a ban on wolf-dog hybrids to create a registry.
That's a great question. We can't commit to what is going to happen one way or the other at this point, but I think that there are certainly merits to registration for a lot of animals. So if we are able to evaluate that process and work with the Board of Supervisors to see if that's something they would be amenable to, that's certainly something that we can review and consider.
Another question from Krista, asking in the event of a similar incident, are there plans to notify neighbors if there's a loose animal?
I don't know that there's any plans in place for that as things stand. It's certainly something that we would definitely explore, whether that be through Alert Loudoun or other means that we can communicate with neighborhoods to ensure that we are alerting anyone that would be impacted by such a situation. So it's definitely something that as we progress with this process, we will explore to ensure that we are getting the message out if it's necessary.
Next question is asking what events or incidents have occurred that has created the need for this ordinance?
We've had several situations over the years where we've encountered exotic animals. Most recently, we've had a situation where an individual had owned several venomous snakes along with 3 to 4 alligators, or 3 alligators and 1 caiman. With that incident, one of the alligators was allowed to roam freely on the property, which was obviously a huge concern to us and the Department of Wildlife Resources. So it was after that event that we decided we needed to push forward with this to ensure that the public is safe from these types of situations.
But it is worth mentioning that this is not the only incident that we've worked with. We've received a number of calls over the years regarding a number of species that have involved, sort of complex or simple investigations, some of which the animal was not located. So it's difficult to know whether or not there was a real or substantiated risk or if the animal was present. We recognize that these animals are present in our community. When we spoke with neighboring jurisdictions such as Fairfax and Arlington, they all stated that it was well known that these animals are within our community. Whether or not we are aware of every location of them is probably up for discussion. But the reality is we know that these animals do exist. We just want to make sure that they are kept in as safe a way as possible. Any other questions? Okay, well, we will just be here. We will continue to wait. As questions arrive, we are happy to answer them.
And we have a question from Lori asking, have you ever had an issue with wolf dogs?
I don't recall having a specific issue outside of just general concerns for the animal, welfare concerns, things like that. I don't recall offhand having a situation where we had concern for a specific animal posing a specific threat. We certainly have individuals that were concerned for the confinement of those animals, but nothing that indicated that the animal was being kept in a way that was either inhumane or inadequate.
And also worth mentioning is that for any of the species that we're listing here today, the existence of these animals has not previously been prohibited. So if somebody were to call just saying, my neighbor has a king cobra and it's in the yard, that is permissible at this point in time. So without warranting the need for a call for any of these types of species, because there is no prohibition, there is not really an accurate way for us to keep records on the number of calls or inquiries we've had on specific animals.
Question. This one is asking, alligators and many other species are regulated, prohibited, or restricted by state and federal laws. Why is there a need for this ordinance?
So this ordinance essentially catches all the species that are not already regulated by state law. So the animals in the situation that Chief Brosan previously referenced, some of those species were regulated by the Department of Wildlife Resources. So in that situation, the alligators and the caiman were removed from the home by DWR. Our office was part of that opportunity, that investigation, but was not part of the removal because that is something that is state regulated. However, the other species in the house, the gaboon vipers, the spitting cobras, those animals are not regulated by the state, just like baboons are not regulated by the state. And those are all considered companion animals. So at this point, the species we are listing are not regulated. All right, we are going to still be here and we are prepared to answer any questions sent to the box. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here tonight. Just to let everyone know, we are still here. We are on the line. We're prepared to answer any questions you may have. You can go ahead and type those right into the Q&A box, and we are happy to answer any questions you may have regarding this proposed ordinance addition.
Have our next question from Amy asking, at the end of the list of banned animals, it says that it would also ban any warm-blooded meat or marsupial that can normally be found in a wild state. That is a very broad definition and can potentially ban a variety of animals. A few animals that can be found in the wild in other areas of the world include zebu, bison, alpacas, dolly, just to name a few. Shouldn't all banned animals be listed specifically?
And I think our biggest challenge would be creating an ordinance that we'd be able to list every animal that's possibly out there in terms of exotics or dangerous animals. So that phrase is put in there to cover any animals that may not be listed, but would fall into the category of being exotic or possibly dangerous. So I think it's just from a practicality standpoint that it's just almost impossible to list every animal on this ordinance or in this ordinance. So that's the reason for the phrasing.
And I think that some of those species would fall under the state's definition of agricultural animals. And so if they are considered livestock, that's something that we would review with the county attorney to determine whether or not live animals could be listed under more than one category.
Next question. This one's coming through from Hannah asking, if the ordinance is to promote safety in the community, why are species that are not posed to safety issues included in the ban?
I think one of the things that people don't think of is zoonotic diseases. So it's not necessarily just an attack or a bite that we're concerned with. There's also the possibility of disease that is transmitted from animals, particularly wild animals and exotic animals. So that's also a consideration that we've taken into account when formulating this ordinance.
Asking, curious what zoonotic diseases I'm concerned about.
It's a great question. There's a lot of zoonotic diseases that can be transmitted from animals. The most common diseases we are well aware of and well aware of management of when it comes to domesticated species. But the diseases that, come to mind most immediately for me would be like rabies, tuberculosis, salmonella, hepatitis, polio, leprosy, measles. The non-human primates in particular would be an exceptionally high risk, which is why those who are working in laboratories with these animals do get a very large number of vaccines just to make sure they are safe.
Hannah asking, have there been many cases of people contracting zoonotic disease?
At this point, that's not something that this department would track. That would be something that we would have to send an inquiry to the health department, and the health department would not necessarily be tracking those diseases either, depending on what the disease is and what the source is. So salmonella is exceptionally common, and as are some of the other more common disease that you will see out in the community. Whether or not the source is tracked every single time is not clear, but that's not something that this department is doing at this time. but it is something that we do recognize is an inherent risk of close contact with the animals, especially in our urban and suburban settings.
All right, our next question comes from Shirley Johnson asking, was the animal law unit in Richmond involved in this proposed legislation?
No, the animal law unit was not involved in this proposed legislation. This came locally from Loudoun County Department of Animal Services. We're going to go ahead and turn off our cameras, but we are still here waiting for your questions. So any questions you have, please feel free to place those right in the Q&A box, and we are happy to continue answering them right up until 7. Thank you.
So we have our next question. Why ban a wide variety of animals in Loudoun instead of instituting a permitting process for responsible animal owners?
I think, again, the main concern behind trying to push forward with this ordinance is for a public safety issue. And I think in order to do that, we need to make sure that we are covering all the ground that we can to ensure that the public's safe. To limit it to a registry or to a certain type of animal or species of animal would not accomplish that goal. So I think pushing forward the way we are is the best way to ensure that the public is safe in any type of response that we have to have to these situations.
We have our next question. Documents on domestically bred or legally imported animals is often very hard to obtain. USDA does not keep this information more than a few years. Will this be used to prohibit ownership of non-native species?
I think ultimately that would have to be a question for county attorney's office as to how that would be determined. But there is, the exclusion of animals such as, parrots, for example, is not something that we are going to be searching for, because parrots overall are not considered as part of sort of the higher risk in terms of public safety risk. But in terms of figuring out the actual documentation path, that's something we would need to work with probably a combination of the USDA and the county attorney's office to determine that paper trail if it were necessary.
We have our next question. Lori asks, can I provide you a titer test to show that the rabies vax does work in wolf dogs?
I think the information that we have is what we've based the decision for the inclusion of hybrid canines regarding the effectiveness of the rabies virus. The information comes from the CDC, the AVMA, and the Food and Drug Administration. So that's the information and the data that we've used to include that. So in respect to that, that's how we determine that. And I think that's what we would stick with at this point, unless further information would come forward from the health department or other agencies to indicate that we should, look at titers.
At this point, the Commonwealth of Virginia does not accept titers in lieu of vaccination for domestic dogs. So I am not aware of an exception for other species.
Our next question from Shirley. Shirley asks, there was a similar ban in another Virginia county that HSUS was involved in. Are they also involved in Loudoun?
We've been in communication with a number of state and federal agencies. There's been no lobbying. There's been no promotion from HSUS. So we are aware of the language that was drafted with their assistance in Arlington, and much of the language that we used here is mirroring that in Arlington County, but HSUS has not written this ordinance in any way for what we have used it for, and they did not write the board item. That came directly from here at Loudoun County Department of Animal Services. We are here still accepting your questions. We're going to go ahead and shut off video, but we are available. We are online and ready to answer any questions that are posted in the Q&A box. So go ahead and keep posting your questions until 7 o'clock, and we are happy to answer them.
We have our next question coming from Shirley. The Loudoun resident who was cited in the proposal had alligators and venomous reptiles. He was breaking Virginia law by not having permits for those animals, correct? How would this proposed legislation have made any difference in that scenario?
That's a great question because they were breaking the law that exists in terms of alligators. However, there is no law presently that would have impacted his ownership of those venomous reptiles, which is why the venomous reptiles stayed in place when the alligators were removed by the Department of Wildlife Resources. So this legislation would, at a minimum, if he registered them with us, say this law passed and he were to want to retain them, they would be registered so that we would know that those animals were on premises in the event of a need for a first responder to go there for any reason. They would know that those animals are on premises. And if he did not have them registered, then it would have prevented us from leaving the house and leaving him with a number of animals, including gaboon vipers, spitting cobras, and a 12-foot king cobra, which is allowed to be loose in his yard.
We have our next question asking, would it be possible for organizations such as USARK, the American Federation of Aviculture, Avicultural Society of America, or the Organization of Professional Aviculture to be involved in the process of writing this final ordinance?
We are happy to receive feedback from any organization or individual, especially individuals who live or work here in Loudoun County. So if there's feedback that anyone has from any of those organizations, they are more than welcome to provide that to us. We are still working through the details of this ordinance. It is not currently in its final form. So any additions we make, we welcome any feedback from any professionals who are associated with any of those groups or any others. And just a reminder, there will be a link to the comment form for public comment to be submitted, and then that will be compiled and provided to the Board of Supervisors. That is provided at the top of this chat and will also be provided at the end.
We have our next question. There are very few members of these large national organizations in Loudoun County. Wouldn't their input be helpful?
Yes, absolutely. As we mentioned, we are accepting feedback from anyone. We did not limit participation in this meeting to residency, and we will not limit participation in the public comment form to residency either. So if there is anybody involved with those organizations who wants to provide feedback, we are more than happy to speak with anyone, and they're welcome to reach out to us either through the public comment form or through the means listed previously. Talia, do you mind switching back to the previous slide that has the website and our email address? You can see right there, animals@loudoun.gov is how to reach staff at Department of Animal Services directly, and they'll be able to see updates to this particular matter on loudoun.gov/chapter 612 edition. That's chapter 612 edition. More questions?
No further questions.
There are.
Oh, there are, all right. Fantastic. Shirley asks, there is a working model in Maryland in which the local animal control works with zoos and other professional herpetologists to allow the keeping of venomous snakes by private individuals. Benefits of this could be providing venom for labs to manufacture antivenom, which there's a shortage of. Is this something Loudoun would consider?
That's something we would have to look into. It's not something that I'm personally familiar with, and I'm not sure if that is the nature of that. So if the zoos and professional herpetologists are maintaining them for the purpose of labs manufacturing antivenom, that would be something I'd definitely be interested in getting some of that data on and understanding the structure of that program.
Our next question is from Lori. Will you allow nonprofits that specialize in wolf dog education, responsible ownership, and rescue to participate?
I think and Lori, feel free to clarify if I'm not answering this correctly, but if you're referring to participation in the ordinance process, you are welcome to do so. Absolutely, please do submit your information to the public comment form, and that goes directly to the Board of Supervisors and to us, or you can go ahead and email staff at animals@loudoun.gov. The way just this process works for folks to understand is that the department presents basic information. The Board of Supervisors reviews it and determines whether or not this is exactly what they are looking for, whether it's something that meets the needs that they have determined has been explained by staff, if they want to send it back to us for further review, if they want to solicit further public information. All of it will be reviewed, of course, by the county attorney to make sure that it is in alignment with the Code of Virginia and the other Loudoun County ordinances. But if people are looking to provide feedback, we are absolutely here for it. And for those looking for the comment form in a clickable format, you'll be able to see that in the chat box. So right, just as you can see on the slide, it's loudoun.gov/chapter 612 edition. Right there is where you can find the comment form and more information.
We have our next question. This one's coming from Shirley asking, will this legislation prohibit the raising of alternative livestock and other species, which has been instrumental in saving many small farms across the county?
So at this point, Shirley, we're not looking for, I don't want to do a Q&A back and forth, but if I know that there's been a question of livestock, so I just want to make sure I'm answering your question correctly. So feel free to elaborate. And I was able to look up some of the species that were listed by a person who asked before. All of the animals listed that were, bison types, llamas, some of the more exotic animals, such as like the zebu. Those animals are all still considered livestock, so there's no way that this would be impactful to those specific species. However, if there's other species that we're not thinking of, I do want to make sure that we are recognizing, of course, if there are impacts to the agricultural community that we've not thought of, but we specifically want to make sure that agricultural animals as defined in the code were not part of this. And that's also why we actually added in ratites and emu as part of the exception process. Just making sure that those animals are not included in this law, whereas they are included in some other communities, because we do recognize that emu, for example, are agricultural animals to many people. So we want to make sure that those animals were excluded from this prohibition. So if there's animals that you can think of that we have not included that are part of the agricultural community, please let us know what those might be so we can make sure that those animals are correctly identified as part of the code.
Shirley asks, what about yak and nilgai?
So in terms of many specific species, we'd have to go through and determine whether and what their specific genus is. But I'm not familiar with anybody in Loudoun County currently raising yak or nilgai. If you are, we're happy to speak with them and work with them to understand what their role is, where they fall, and make sure that they are appropriately covered by existing law if those are part of the agricultural community. Ask again.
Shirley asks zebras.
I'm wondering if you're asking if zebras are included. Again, that's another species. We will have to go ahead and look and see if zebras are part of the agricultural community here in Loudoun. And again, if anybody here is raising zebras for an agricultural purpose, we're happy to engage with them. But as many folks know, this does again exclude those who are exhibitors. So people who are exhibiting animals as part of a zoo type process are already excluded. But I'm not familiar with anybody who is using zebras in Loudoun County for agricultural purposes. But if they are, we'd certainly want to evaluate where they stand in terms of their definition within current existing Code of Virginia.
Our next question is also from Shirley, asking, how does this affect future farming?
I'm not really clear on that question, so feel free to ask a follow-up on that, but I'm not sure what future farming species would be impacted. So as we mentioned, any animals that are currently defined by the Code of Virginia or by the Loudoun County Ordinances defining agricultural animals, those animals are not impacted because they are defined already as livestock. So I don't know what future animals might be considered for farming that would be impacted. I'm not familiar with farm uses for, animals like baboons or venomous snakes. So If there are such uses, of course, we want to evaluate any of that information. So if you have that information, by all means, please submit it through the comment form so we can ensure that if there are agricultural animals that are being impacted, that we are evaluating that process. We are coming down to our last couple minutes. So we do appreciate your dialogue this morning. Feedback from the public, of course, is a really important part of this process. If you are unable to submit your questions before or during this meeting, you still have the opportunity to do so. So if you go up to the chat box up on the right, you can click right on that bar. You can fill in the comment form and see more information right at loudoun.gov/chapter 612 edition. If you can't see that chat box or access it for any reason, it's also on the main slide. You can see it right there at loudoun.gov/chapter 612 edition. You can submit questions to a comment form, and we certainly appreciate any feedback that we receive. Questions and answers from this meeting will be compiled and provided to the proposed addition to Chapter 612 webpage. In addition, the questions and comments we received this evening will be provided to the Board of Supervisors during an upcoming meeting. Thank you to everyone for your time and attention on this evening's call, and we are going to wrap up just momentarily here. It is now 7 o'clock and we will be signing off. We look forward to your future feedback and we'll see you at future meetings. Thank you so much.